Hey everyone, it's Kayla, and today I wanted to come on and share with you my personalized learning plan. So, for the purposes of this artifact, I am using my current fifth grade classroom as a reference in my personalized learning transformation. For this artifact, I chose to use the Georgia Essential Conditions for Personalized Learning. There are 9 standards total, and I chose 5 of them to incorporate into my plan. I chose each of these I chose these standards because I really liked how they designated a specific role for each of the 3 people that make up a classroom. So there is the learner, which we would refer to as the student, the instructional designer, which we know as the teacher, and then the learning coach, which is anybody who is helping the learner outside the classroom. So this could be a parent, a tutor, a sibling, anyone helping them at home. And so if you'll notice, out of the 5 standards that I chose, each standard is specific in the expectations of the learner, the instructional designer, and the learning coach. I really appreciate this as this serves as a guide and lets everyone know what they are responsible for and what is expected of them. The 5 standards that I have chosen for this artifact is growth mindset, learner voice, authentic and adaptive assessment, dynamic communication, and expanded collaboration. So, the purposes in choosing these 5 standards is the first 3 I feel like I already somewhat incorporate into my current classroom and easily could shift what I currently do into a personalized learning classroom. The bottom 2, dynamic communication and expanded collaboration, are a little more outside of my comfort zone, and I felt I could stretch myself a little in adapting these into my current classroom situation. So let's go ahead and get started. Here is my personalized learning plan. And as you'll notice, this is a very broad looking plan because this is a very fluid document, meaning it is subject to change, be added to, or taken away. So first, let's talk about the growth mindset goal. My goal for this standard would be that learners would become proficient in goal setting, creating, implementing, and achievement while being effectively supported by myself, the instructional designer, and their learning coach. So to achieve this goal, my action step would be goal sheets. So my idea would be for students to create a goal in the 4 major content areas of reading, math, science, and social studies. I would have students create a goal specific to each content area at the beginning of each 9 weeks. Students would record their goal on a designated goal sheet. Along with setting the goal, I would have students list 3 ways that they could work to achieve this goal and 5 ways that they would know that they were achieving it. After filling out the goal sheets, the learner and the instructional designer would discuss the sheet and agree upon the goal set. These goal sheets would be placed in students' learner portfolios, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes, and would be referred to on a weekly basis during regular co-planning sessions. The timeline for this goal would be the entire year. It would take place at the beginning of the school year, such as August, and would end in May at the end of the school year. It would be a year-long process. The only resource we would need would be the created goal sheet. And as far as readiness goes, my students will be pretty well prepared for this as we are a Leader in Me school. This initiative was developed by Franklin Covey that my school adopted about 7 years ago, and the purpose was to empower students with the leadership and life skills they would need to thrive in the 21st century. It's based on principles and practices of personal, interpersonal, and organizational effectiveness, and upon the powerful premise that every child possesses unique strengths and has the ability to be a leader. Therefore, goal setting is a huge component in our school. My students have practice in setting goals. However, currently the goals are driven and strongly guided by myself, the teacher. It usually goes something like this. Hey, this is where you should be at the end of the year for reading. Here's your current reading lexile. How about you make a goal of 100 points of growth? And then students make that goal. For the personalized learning transformation, I would have my students pace their own progress and not only have them create the long-term goal, but also begin incorporating those short-term goals as well. I would also back off in terms of driving student goals and let the student be the driver. And the priority for the learning coaches would be to play a part in helping their learner achieve the goal set, because currently the learning coaches really don't have a role or don't really even know that their students are creating goals. So I would definitely want them to have a part in that. As far as barriers go, Time is a huge factor in any of these, in my personal opinion. So as you'll notice as we go through this plan, 4 out of my 5 barriers consist of time, because as I have been researching and diving into this course with personalized learning, I'm continuing to be reminded of time. And all these ideas and strategies sound fantastic, but I keep being reminded of where am I going to find the time to do all these things, which is why this is a major barrier for me in each one of my goals. However, more specifically for growth mindset, a barrier that I foresee is achieving the role of the instructional designer and the learning coach, where how do we find that balance of effectively guiding students without explicitly telling them what they should or need to do? Therefore, this would take time, training, and practice on both parts of the instructional designer and the learning coach to practice how to effectively do this. So the next goal I have is learner voice. And my goal is that the learners would find their voice and know how to appropriately communicate their needs and wants by the learning environment. Myself and the learning coach would have an open mind to support student voice. The action step I would use to achieve this goal would be morning meetings. So morning meetings would occur each morning. Students would identify their emotional status based on 4 colors, and they would participate in a game, discussion questions, or watch a video over various topics to get them thinking and talking. By having morning meetings, students could begin feeling comfortable voicing their opinions and practice listening skills in a safe space. This would build a comfort level, which would then help build students' confidence when voicing how they need or want to learn based on their interest in learning styles during co-planning sessions. And again, like the first goal, this would be a year-long process as students would develop their learner voice over time. The resources we would need would be the emotional chart that would list each of the 4 colors, discussion topic cards, games to encourage voice and opinions, and learner voice videos. The readiness for this goal would be that my school during this past school year had an initiative for SEL lessons, which stands for social and emotional lessons. And we spent a lot of time this last year talking about what those 4 colors mean, how we identify our emotions, how is it appropriate to respond when we're feeling specific emotions. So my students already have this background. Therefore, this would help in achieving learner voice. And by having these morning meetings and focusing on these social and emotional lessons, it would allow learners to become more comfortable when speaking during co-planning sessions, helping them to identify their learning wants and needs and how to voice their interests within the classroom. The barriers, along with time, as previously discussed, would be the classroom dynamic. Creating a classroom culture would be a critical in initiating student voice, in my opinion, but it could also be a barrier that I would anticipate. Each classroom is so different based on the personalities of your students, and the instructional designer would have to be intentional and knowledgeable about the classroom and learn and research the best strategies based on the needs of their students, because we have to create a safe space for students to share, not only in a collaborative setting such as a morning meeting, but they also have to feel comfortable enough with their instructional designer in the co-planning session to know how to voice their needs and their wants, which would require an extensive amount of time to build relationships with your students. The next goal I have is authentic and adaptive assessments. My goal for this standard would be for a portfolio to be created based on the assessment data that could be used by all 3 parties, the learner, the instructional designer, and the learning coach. So the action step to achieve this goal would be a learner portfolio. And my idea is that students would create a portfolio that would house their goal setting sheets as discussed in growth mindset and any artifact that would assess their learning. So an assessment, a project, a paper. These portfolios would be used during each co-planning session that would be constantly built throughout the year. That way, students could go to this resource frequently in their learning, and it would help them identify their needs and wants based on the assessments and the artifacts that were in their portfolio. Again, like the previous 2 goals, this would last all year long as they would continue building their portfolio throughout the year. The resources we would need would be binders that would serve as the portfolio, the goal sheets, and assessments or the data artifacts. So the readiness for this goes back to leader in me. Part of this program is that students create a learner portfolio. When thinking of the transition into the personalized learning classroom, the portfolios would look very differently. Currently, the portfolios house their goal sheets, they house maybe some tracking sheets and also some celebrations. But for that personalized learning classroom, I would want my students to house that shift, that it doesn't necessarily just have to be data. I would want them to have that mindset shift as to what is the purpose of these portfolios. The purpose would be this would be a resource for them to use, and that they could use these documents to determine the different types of learning experiences that they would need. And it would be more of a go-to as to how are we going to achieve this goal based on what's in our portfolio. The barriers that I see along with time is that creating the assessments for students to put in this portfolio would be a huge barrier, as the instructional designer would have to have a variety of different assessment tools based on each student's needs, wants, and learning styles. This would take a lot of time, and it would require an extensive knowledge base from the instructional designer, and they would have to be extremely well versed across all content areas to know how to create the assessments and what's going to be best for their learners. So the next goal is the expanded collaboration, and I would want to allow for more peer-to-peer communication and provide timely and effective feedback in each content area at least once a week. So my action step to begin this goal would be classroom design. So I would want to help design a classroom with specific learning areas. For example, a small group collaborative table where students could get small group help with their peers, an independent workstation where they could work independently, and then a teacher's table where they could come for extra instruction. By setting up these specific areas, students would feel free to collaborate when needed and would feel comfortable in doing so. The room would also be filled with tables, desks, flexible seating areas, rugs, and pillows, and the goal would be to provide multiple areas where students would feel free to learn and feel comfortable. This would last, really the timeline would be pre-planning, as I would set all of this up before the school year even started. The resources we would need would be rugs, pillows, large tables, and flexible seating. The readiness would be that I already somewhat have some of these components in my classroom. There is a small group area, and there is some flexible seating, such as I do have some pillows, bean bags, things like that in my classroom. However, the barriers for me is space and money. So my current classroom is a standard size classroom. It's pretty tiny, especially once you get 25, 10, and 11-year-olds in there and we start moving around. It gets real small real quick. So I'm not really sure how I would incorporate all of these different learning areas in such a small classroom space. And also, it takes a lot of money to make a cute and fun and welcoming and fun, inviting classroom. And where would this money come from? How would I transform my classroom into this perfect personalized learning classroom with a small teacher salary? So the final goal that I have is dynamic communication, and my goal would be that learners would be confident when speaking to their peers and adults, for the instructional designer and the learning coaches to be effective and supportive when learners have speaking opportunities. So my action step would be community outreach projects. So my idea is at the beginning of each grading period, students would pick one content area and they would work together to co-plan with myself and with their peers in creating a project that would solve a community goal. And so they would need student computers for internet research, and they would also need the support of community leaders and stakeholders. The readiness is that students already have one-to-one Chromebooks and are already pretty tech savvy, being fifth graders, so they already know how to navigate a computer, but the barriers here would be the stakeholder buy-in and the community leader support. How are we going to get this? How are we going to reach out to those community members? And how are students going to be able to effectively complete those projects? So this is my personal learning plan. I hope you have enjoyed it and it has given you some ideas of how you could implement a personalized learning plan in your classroom.